outstanding effort again.
We're busting ours to kick yours.
That's big time.
-15.
Respect all, fear none.
Oh, did he belt that one?
Intensity is not a perfume.
It was a no-doubter.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
We are up in the bird's nest here at Oriole Park at Camden Yards. I'm Brendan Mortensen alongside Annie Klaff here on this rainy, kind of terrible Wednesday in Baltimore.
It is brutal outside.
It's not good. If you were planning on coming to a baseball game at Opassi tonight, maybe I would change your plans.
Yeah.
Maybe try to come to that baseball game tomorrow. Do not see a scenario in which the Orioles play baseball tonight, given the fact that it's going to rain for the next, 72 to 1,000 hours, approximately.
May has been more of May showers than May flowers.
It really has.
April was great. And from what I remember, I feel like April, there were tons of beautiful days, and it has been an April flowers, May showers type of season.
They got the rhyme wrong.
They did.
They blew it. But it brings me comfort to know, Annie, on this podcast before we have talked about a lot of sports dadisms, it brings me comfort to know that somewhere in the suburbs there's a dad looking outside going, man, we needed this. He's just looking at his lawn. It's a little bit brown. And he's like, man, we really needed this rain.
I said that yesterday about my plants in my back patio. I have like little hanging baskets and an herb garden. And it was so nice yesterday when I came home from the office yesterday where I was like, hey, listen.
So you're going suburban dad mode,
I
is
did
what you're
not
saying.
need, I got my grill. I did not
Nice.
need to water my plants yesterday.
That's a huge win
Yeah,
for
that is a
suburban
huge-
dad
It
Annie
is.
Klaff. Well, we have a lot to talk about today that is not our suburban catchphrases. We've got injury updates as always. And today, Annie, we're going to be talking about what would make a successful season here for the Orioles the rest of the way. Obviously, the standings are what they are. And this is where the Orioles are at this point. So what does a successful rest of the year look like? Is that making the playoffs? Is it making the right moves at the deadline? Getting some guys to progress? Seeing some prospects, whatever it may be. We're going to break down all the possibilities there of what that means to us, but we're going to start with some injury updates, and there are actually some positive injury updates, I think. We'll start down on the farm. Colton Cowser and Jordan Westberg, both in Norfolk for rehab assignments. They got rained out yesterday because, of course, they did.
Of course, May showers.
Right, but they are both in AAA, which means they are seemingly not super, super far off from returning to Baltimore.
Yeah, and that's huge, especially because, well, first of all, if you're down in Norfolk, that would be a fun time to go see the Tides
go
play.
See the Tides.
See two of the best players in this lineup.
You can see the Tides on MASN, too, by the way.
Sure, yeah, nice plug there.
We'll be airing that Norfolk Tides game either tonight or if it gets rained out. Or no, we'll be airing the Tides game tomorrow. If the Orioles game gets rained out, it'll be on MASN, too.
Yes.
If the Orioles game does not get rained out and they play tonight, the Tides will be on MASN tomorrow night. Anyway.
Lovely little MASN Plus plug there.
Yeah, there you go.
But again, Cowser, Westberg are two of the guys that are some of the best in this Orioles lineup. So you are really itching to get them back. Cowser, if not getting injured this year in very, very early into the season, he probably could have been on pace to be an all-star. Same with Jordan Westberg. When they are at their healthiest state, they are some of the best hitters on this team, especially in defense as well. So getting them back is going to be huge. Westberg, we say this week in, week out, that they need him in those clutch moments. His OPS with runners in scoring position in his career and last season are exactly what the Orioles need, especially in a game like last night.
Yeah, Cowser has all the tools to be an all-star. We were I think a lot of folks were anticipating a big year 2 leap for him after his first full offseason as a big leaguer, knowing that he was going to crack this roster, knowing, having a full season of information of how pitchers were attacking him. Cowser had all of the tools to potentially be a breakout candidate on this team, and Jordan Westberg, we saw what he could give you last year, making an all-star appearance in just really his first full season as a starter. So both of those guys really, really crucial to the lineup. I would anticipate that once they're back, they're both probably slotted in somewhere 1 through 5 in this lineup at this point, and they're going to be huge, huge additions for a lineup that really needs a jolt. One of the reasons they do not have a jolt right now is because Adley Rutschman has been out over the past few days. Rutschman was playing a little bit better over the past few weeks, we have talked about it a lot, where he is hitting the ball decently well and just not really finding the results. But in Boston over the weekend, gets a foul ball off the mask, and I think the immediate concern once he gets pulled from that game is, okay, does he have a concussion? Is he going to be placed on the injured list for an extended period of time on a concussion IL? Tony Mansolino says yesterday that he avoided the concussion IL, is still not appearing in a game as of now, but we will anticipate seeing Rutschman sooner rather than later because he's not on the injured list. So that's a win.
Yeah, and this is big not because of his offensive results. We all know that those weren't translating so far this season, but you still have him in the everyday lineup. He is your number one catcher, definitely a better alternative to Maverick Hanley, Chadwick Tromp in that scenario. Yes, defensively, even offensively with his numbers not getting the results right now. We know that the underlying metrics are there, and we know that it will translate eventually. He just needs to get there, and that is going to be a big topic of conversation for when we get down later into the podcast as well.
Yeah, and just in general, not having a concussion. Good.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a win.
Unlike
so we'll take
potentially Melanie Newman, who also suffered a hit from a foul ball, and she took it like an absolute champ.
Yeah, shout out Melanie. Broadcasted the very next day after having to be removed from the game after, I think it was Rob Refsnyder. A foul ball just to the dome, but took it like a champ. Yeah. Shout out Melanie.
Shout out.
Another good injury update. Gary Sanchez and Ramon Laureano, both hitting. That's good. They haven't started rehab assignments yet. Gary Sanchez has been out for a while with a thumb injury. Ramon Laureano has been out for, a week now at this point after that really weird tumble in Milwaukee where he slides, gets caught under himself a little bit. He's been out since then. So both of those guys, I know they are not your everyday starters. Gary Sanchez is the backup catcher to Adley Rutschman. Ramon Laureano, when everybody is healthy, is probably your fourth outfielder once Colton Cowser gets back. Who knows where he is into play with Tyler O'Neill and Heston Kjerstad when you're starting to look at five guys potentially in the outfield. But getting both of those guys in the fold is still going to be helpful. Gary Sanchez, offensively, you would imagine, I know he got off to a slow start this season, but would be an upgrade over Maverick Hanley, who has done an admirable job up here. I think, the offense hasn't come along, but from all accounts, he has called a nice game, gets along with the pitching staff. But Gary Sanchez, you would presume, is going to be an upgrade there offensively. And then Ramon Laureano has really been a spark plug off the bench in the absence of Colton Cowser and Tyler O'Neill. So getting both those guys back, it helps your depth, right? Where you're not looking at 7, 8, 9 in the lineup, and it's a bunch of guys that you weren't expecting to make big league contributions. You don't have to stretch Jorge Mateo into the outfield.
Exactly.
You don't have to make those sorts of decisions because Sanchez and Laureano provide the depth that you were hoping they would.
Yeah, especially with some kind of ambiguity right now with Cedric Mullins just being worn down from the season is what Tony Mansolino has kind of coined it, a little bit of just exhaustion and precautionary moves for him to not be in the lineup over the last span of the last few days, not consistently in the lineup, that is. So with Ramon Laureano having that extra depth in the outfield as well, he was quite a positive shock, too, on his defense. An incredible arm out there. Like you mentioned, his offense was also one of the leading guys on this lineup for creating movement down this lineup. Same with Dylan Carlson, too. He's been doing really well. Yesterday did not get a hit, but he had back-to-back games with homers in each one before that. So there is still some depth in this lineup, and getting Ramon Laureano just elevates that even more.
Yeah, and it kind of shifts everybody down a level. When you have Gary Sanchez and Ramon Laureano back in the fold, those guys are supposed to be your backups. Yeah. And then the guys that are supposed to be either, AAA roster depth, players like Dylan Carlson and Maverick Hanley, right now they are expected to do a heck of a lot. And if the depth was healthier, you view them as what they were supposed to be, which is that AAA roster bubble type of guy that you need in an emergency. And hopefully they can come up for a short stretch of time and give you something. But now we're looking at, Maverick Hanley and Dylan Carlson have been here for a while. And those are guys that have provided value. As I mentioned, Hanley has done some nice things, whether it's, sacrifice bunts or sack flies. He's doing the little stuff well. And Dylan Carlson has not had a nice stretch as of late. But that wasn't the plan for those guys. It wasn't the plan to have Jorge Mateo in center field and Emmanuel Rivera in the lineup more often than not, and Hanley and Carlson. You were supposed to have more depth than that. So we just talked about 5 guys who could be back in the fold relatively soon. I would imagine Sanchez will go on rehab assignment for a decent stretch of time. Laureano, not sure. He might spend, at this point, maybe 2 weeks on the injured list. Not sure if that warrants a rehab stint. If it does, maybe he's in Norfolk for 4 or 5 games, right? It probably won't be a super extended rehab stint for Laureano, but you just need depth back. And in Cowser, Westbrook, and Rutschman, that's 3 guys that are going to be in the lineup every day. And then Sanchez and Laureano are just good pieces to help supplement them.
Right, and with Sanchez's injury and also Adley's at the same time, it's normal for you to spin your head towards, okay, well, Samuel Basallo is mashing right now in AAA, and why are you bringing up Maverick Hanley and Chadwick Tromp instead of Samuel Basallo? It's normal for your head to spin that way because Basallo is going to be a big league contributor at some point. Just now is definitely not the time, especially with Adley avoiding concussion protocol. Yes, his numbers offensively were not there, but that still does not warrant optioning Adley and replacing him with Basallo because he's still definitely your number one catcher, and you're not going to rush Basallo's progression in the minors.
No, real quick, if you're talking about optioning Adley Rutschman, no.
Here comes a Brendan rant.
No, I'm not even going to get on that rant because it is too ridiculous to even warrant a rant. It's stupid. No, you're not optioning Adley Rutschman. But Samuel Basallo, again, you're not going to rush his progression. He has caught 5 games in AAA Norfolk at this point. You want to make sure he is healthy. He has dealt with injuries throughout spring training at the beginning of this season. You want to get him back to where you feel totally comfortable with him defensively. The bat is going to play at the big league level. That hasn't been a question for a year for Samuel Basallo, right? You could have called him up after AA Bowie and felt like the bat was going to translate, but he needs seasoning in AAA Norfolk on the defensive side of the ball. We are going to see him eventually, and it is going to be fun, and it is going to be awesome. But now is not the time, especially because you are not trying to... Yes, you're trying to win as many games as possible right now. I understand that. But Basallo's defense may not do that. While his offense does, you don't know what you're going to get from him from a defensive perspective. You know what you get from Maverick Hanley. Tromp has been a big league catcher throughout his career. Mm-hmm. They're a little bit more of known commodities, whereas Basallo could come up and just not be where you want him to be defensively, whether that's, blocking his arm, calling a game. There's a lot of things that go into it. You want to make sure he's healthy. You want to make sure he is ready to go. All right, Annie. Main topic of conversation today is that there is a little bit of reason for optimism with this Orioles team. They dropped last night's game. Again, we've talked about it before where that's the kind of game that even good teams around the league will lose, where you turn the ball over to a reliever who's normally been good, and all of a sudden they have a bad outing, and there goes that baseball game. Last night it was Brian Baker. Hard to knock that guy who has been pitching as well as he has this season. Yeah, sometimes games go that way. It's just a tougher pill to swallow for the Orioles, who don't have a lot of room for error at this point. But you get a good start out of Sugano. The offense was good enough. Ryan O'Hearn has been doing some incredible things as of late. And Brian Baker, who's a good arm, yeah, all right, it goes that way sometimes. But going into that game, they had won 3 in a row against good teams in Boston and St. Louis. Trevor Rogers was incredible over the weekend. Charlie Morton was good. Ryan O'Hearn, as I mentioned, has been playing unbelievable baseball as of late. Jackson Holliday has been playing really good as well. There has been good stuff all around for these guys. I know that the record is not where they want it to be, and it's not, it's not the expectation that we had for this team at the beginning of the season, but it's still reason for optimism. Yeah. And so we kind of wanted to place where that optimism should be going towards and what the outlook of the season needs to be. Right,
and it's definitely been a very confusing month of May. Obviously, there was a lot going on with the dismissal of Brandon Hyde. But when you look at the last week or so, things have felt lighter and more positive than the start of the season. I mean, you did get 3 straight wins for the first time this year. That's obviously a point of optimism comparatively to the rest of the season.
Yeah, it's the first time you had 3 in a row.
Right, exactly.
Sure.
And you also can't forget that their record against division teams, yes, it's 8-8 against AL East foes. Yes, it's still 500, but they're still in the fight for at least against division teams. So you have a series win against the Yankees, a series split not long ago against the Red Sox, a series split with the Blue Jays to open the season. There are definitely some positives to this season. There have been no doubt struggles on the starting rotation front, the pitching front, the bullpen as of late, this offense pushing through and underperforming. But again, like you mentioned, there are still points of emphasis to focus on for the rest of the season and how you can channel them moving forward in terms of perspective.
Yeah, there's silver linings, right?
Yeah.
A 3-game win streak is nice. It's nice that it's the first time. It's not nice that it's the first time it's happened this season. It's nice that it did happen. There is reason to say, okay, if you get some solid starts out of Trevor Rogers and Charlie Morton at the back half of the rotation, you're not out of games as often as you had been early on in the year. Maybe that gets the lineup back and into form like they were last year. Oh, you have Colton Cowser and Jordan Westberg and Adley Rutschman coming back soon. Those are 3 guys that can hit at the top of the lineup, and we have seen them put up great numbers in their career. Maybe that can get things going, and you pair that with Ryan O'Hearn and Jackson Holliday and Gunnar Henderson, and all of a sudden you're cooking. Like, you can talk yourself into, okay, they can play a lot better baseball down the stretch if the things that we have seen over the last week or so, and combine that with the injuries and getting healthier, okay, we can start to see a better baseball team here down the stretch. But I think we still need to be able to put that into perspective and say, okay, the Orioles are 10 games back of a final wild card spot. They are 19-35 at this point. So what does playing better baseball down the stretch mean? What does a successful rest of the year mean? Because if you take a step back and look at the season holistically, yeah, their record at the end of the year is more than likely going to fall below your expectation for the beginning of the season of what this team could have been and maybe should have been, right? But we can still look at it from here on out and say, okay, this is where they are right now. What does success mean from here on out? Like, what would leave you with a good feeling at the end of the year? And I think there's a few different ways to define that.
Yeah, and of course, when you take a look at the beginning of the season, everyone will tell you that they are shocked on how the start of the season for the Orioles went, especially when you look at how they finished the last 2 seasons, making playoffs back-to-back years, and the raw talent that was on this team up and down the lineup. And yes, you maybe could have done more in the offseason to get better starting pitching. Elias would be the first person to admit that and take responsibility for that.
Right.
But if you do look at it specifically right now and where they are right now, how can we look at ways to salvage the 2025 season for the Orioles? And there's a number of ways that we've kind of defined alternate ways to be able to define a successful season standing at this point of view.
Right, because the way that we're defining it, if it's success the rest of the way, relatively salvaging things, right? That can mean different things.
Right.
So let's dive into that a little bit, because the Orioles are where they are, right? So how do you define what a successful rest of the year means? Is it making the playoffs? You still have a really big hole to climb out of. Is it just in the fight down the stretch? Is it okay, this team is competitive in August and September, you are playing meaningful games, you're right there? Is it retooling at the deadline? You know, we won't get into some of the specific guys that they could trade and say, oh, they can get this pitching prospect or that guy, whatever it may be. But you can look at this team and say, okay, there's expiring contracts, right? There's guys that you might not re-sign in the offseason anyway. Do you use this and view this as almost a reset year? Not one that you really wanted, but still an opportunity to dump some expiring contracts at the deadline. Not dump, that's a wrong word for it, but trade expiring contracts at the deadline. These are good players that you would get
good
something
people.
for. Yes, these are good players that you would get something for, and you reset a little bit there, right? Is it a combination of both of those things where you are trading those guys for big league players that are just a little bit more controllable? Is it just you want to see the young players play well down the stretch and the record's going to be what it's going to be with prospects and just your core of position players getting back to how you want them to be playing. There's a bunch of different ways that we can get into it. So let's start with the making the playoffs scenario, which is really the only way that this team could meet the expectations that they had in the offseason set forth by fans, by the front office, by pretty much everybody that expected this team to compete once again for an AL East title, to win 90-plus games, and to make the playoffs. There's not a lot of historical precedent at this point for a team starting the season like this and finding playoff success. You were as far as 18 games under 500. Hopefully the Orioles don't get back to that point, but that's quite the hole. I mean, expanded playoff format gives you a little bit more of a chance where there are now 3 wildcard teams. You are 10 games back of a wild card at this point, and to make the playoffs based on what we have seen over the past few seasons, you probably need to be 10 games or so above 500. And right now, you are a lot more than 10 games below 500. So that would need to be a big turnaround.
Right. It's not impossible, but it will be very difficult. And I think that when we kind of set the parameters a little bit, if there were parameters for this conversation, of, okay, yes, obviously you looked at what the team's expectations were in the offseason after coming off of 2 back-to-back playoff runs. It is this team probably still has the fight in them to be a playoff team again.
Yeah.
And especially when you look at the last 2 seasons, the last 3 seasons for that matter, and moving into this season, when you look at it right now and their record, it seems a lot less likely to become a playoff team. So it's a lot harder to set that as an accurate goal and way to finish out a successful season is, okay, let's make the playoffs. Obviously, that's an optimistic approach. Obviously, that's what every Baltimore fan is gunning for right now, is for the Orioles to make the playoffs. That is way to salvage the season number 1, and everyone will tell you that. And sure, that you're right, the historical precedents were running out of time for those to meet those. I mean, yes, the Nationals won the World Series in 2019 when they were 19-31 in the first 50 games of the season, but they also had incredibly strong starting pitching. So there's differences in ways you can keep trying to match molds from previous teams in the season. You could say the same thing about the Tigers and the Royals last season in making the playoffs in general.
Yeah, and I think the whole historical precedent thing is, look, this is the first time we have had the playoffs be this expanded over the past few years. And so if you're looking back and saying, well, no team has made the playoffs from this year to this year, starting with this record, we haven't had the expanded playoffs for that long. So you're really only working with a couple of years of information of what teams have needed to do to make the playoffs. But I think you're still looking at about 10 games over 500, which means the Orioles would have to finish 86-76 or go 67-41 the rest of the way. It's a .620 winning percentage, which is a really, really high winning percentage, but they had a .623 winning percentage just 2 seasons ago, and a lot of the core of that team is still here. And you can talk yourself into that roadmap with some of the injury updates that we had at the beginning of the pod here with Kauser and with Westberg and with Adley maybe having a return to form and coming back. And all of a sudden your bench looks a little bit better with Sanchez and Laureano, and Tyler O'Neill will be back eventually. There are ways that you can talk yourself into the Orioles going, okay, yeah, why can't they go 67-41? It's a lot of the same team they had 2 seasons ago, and 2 seasons ago they didn't have Jackson Holliday, and they didn't have Zach Eflin, right? So there are ways where you can say that. That's just still definitely the most optimistic point of view when you are talking about a successful rest of the year.
And a lot of these routes that we're going to discuss, too, of ways to define a successful season at this point in time go hand in hand with each other. So, like, you can't necessarily have this conversation to making the playoffs without also discussing the trade deadline and what you do with the trade deadline. So keep that in mind as well. But it's definitely going to be difficult to make the playoffs. The optimist in me says that if they get all these young players like Holiday and Henderson and Adley Rutschman to start playing as they have been advertised to play, and that we both know that they can play and they have played in the past. If you tie that with getting guys like Grayson Rodriguez back, Kyle Bradish back, obviously you can't let up the win and loss margin until you get them back even further. So there's a lot of things that need to go according to plan in order for that to be a likely situation to make the playoffs.
Yeah, and I think I kind of fall in a line of thinking where the position player core getting back to playing well is way more important than the win and loss record. But if the core getting back to playing really well happens,
It'll translate.
It's going to translate to the win and loss record one way or another. So I think I kind of fall under an umbrella here where you're just in the fight down the stretch, and that doesn't necessarily mean you have this miraculous comeback where you make the playoffs and all of a sudden the vibes are through the roof and you're winning 65% of your games, right? But there is a scenario, and I think it is the scenario that the Orioles need to focus on and needs to be the priority, right? Is making sure and evaluating why Gunnar Henderson and Adley Rutschman have not been playing up to their standard of baseball. You need to get Colton Cowser and Jordan Westberg back and playing the baseball that they can play. You have Jackson Holliday, who has really been progressing and has been playing great baseball, but you've got to figure out why Ryan Mountcastle's numbers are down, why Heston Kjerstad is not playing as well as some of the flashes he has had over the past few seasons. Because going forward, you can make whatever arguments you want to make about how this offseason went. If you don't like some of the pitching moves that were made or how this core was supplemented in the lineup, you can make all of those arguments, and that can be all well and good for the 2025 season. But if the young core does not get back to the kind of baseball that they are capable of playing, you have a lot more problems than the 2025 season. Now, I don't think that's the case because I have a really hard time believing that Adley Rutschman is just never going to be putting up the kind of numbers that he did in his rookie season. From everything I know about the sport of baseball, that doesn't make sense to me, right? Gunnar Henderson, I know, missed a good chunk of spring training and missed part of the beginning of the season and is still working to get his way back and is having a good season, but it's not the season we saw from him a year ago, but he's a year older and he was a really young player last year. Everything I know about the game is going, yeah, those two guys struggling doesn't make a lot of sense at this point. Heston Kjerstad is the same way. The talent is there. There's no way he should be playing worse baseball than he did in stretches where he didn't have everyday reps a couple of seasons ago. That's what you got to figure out towards the end of the year. And I think when and if that happens, that is going to translate into more wins and losses. And that's great. It might not translate in a playoff appearance, but if you get towards the end of the season, and like you mentioned, Kyle Bradish and maybe Grayson Rodriguez are back. They are healthy. They are in the fold in the starting rotation. Colton Cowser, Jordan Westberg are back. They are healthy. They are playing good baseball. If Gunnar Henderson and Adley Rutschman have a nice 2 last months of the season, if Kobe Mayo is up, if Samuel Basayo is up, and they show you good things, Heston Kjerstad and Ryan Mountcastle get back to themselves a little bit. Yeah, you maybe didn't make the playoffs. Maybe you dug yourself too deep a hole, but you feel good going into the next season. And you can go into the offseason with the thought of, okay, we know the guys that we have in-house. We know the lineup that we have. We know we have some really young, talented arms in Bradish and Rodriguez and others. You feel good going into 2026. But that, to me, is the big thing that would make a successful year, is if you can look at this young core of position players and say, yeah, we're right. These are the guys to build the franchise around. These are the guys that are going to carry us to the playoffs and hopefully deeper over the past few seasons. And sure, maybe there were some missteps and we got unlucky with injury in 2025, however you want to call it. But you could look back at the year and say, man, it didn't all go to plan, but we've got our guys and those guys are good.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you because I think that this is not only the most important, but I also think it's the most likely thing to happen because there is so much potential for these young guys to be the player that everyone knows that they can be. Gunnar Henderson, even if you compare it to last May of 2025 or 2024, excuse me. Let's start with this May. He is at 30 strikeouts, which is not great for May, but an 855 OPS in the month of May for 2025. You look at last May, 25 where'd it go? 25 strikeouts and an 888 OPS. Not that big of a difference. The
Right.
jump from May to June was huge. He got a 1081 OPS in the month of June with actually more strikeouts than the month of May. So I think for Gunnar, there is still possibility for him to get back on track. And he's not the type of player that is going to have a full off year because that just doesn't make sense. He's probably going to have some ebbs and flows. Started off, like you mentioned, having some issues and injuries starting off the season and missing a lot of spring training. So there is still room for him to come back to the player that we know he is going to be. Adley Rutschman, like you mentioned, just has to figure it out at this point because the metrics are there. He just has to hone in on what's happening and why it's not translating. Jackson Holliday just needs to continue exactly what he's doing. And if a lot of, like you mentioned, if you brought in Kobe Mayo and brought in Samuel Basayo towards the latter part of the season, if you can get them time before next season, we know that the jump from year 1 to year 2 is a lot better, especially when you take a look at Jackson Holliday. So you can use him as an example for getting some of these newer prospects and young guys more reps in the big leagues and just try and stay in the fight towards the end of the season and have everybody play up to their potential.
Yeah, because going into 2026, again, regardless of what the win-loss record looks like for the remainder of 2025, your lineup is more than likely going to include Gunnar Henderson, Adley Rutschman, Jackson Holliday, Colton Cowser, Jordan Westberg, Heston Kjerstad, Kobe Mayo, Samuel Basayo. All of these guys are going to be here, and they are going to be contributors. And so if you can get them on track, you still feel good going into next year, regardless of what the record looks like down the stretch. And I think those guys playing good baseball will obviously translate to some more wins and losses, but even if it's not a playoff appearance, you still feel like you can go into next year with confidence, knowing that these are the guys at the core of your team and hopefully at the core of your winning going into next year. And part of that will be the trade deadline and what the Orioles do at this deadline. I think the record is going to have to really drastically improve for them to not potentially move some of those expiring contracts. You could look at this deadline as a potential to retool, and it is not ideal. If the Orioles were going and playing according to plan in 2025, you are buyers at the deadline. You are moving prospects for probably a big-time starting pitcher. You are making a run down the stretch, and everything is great there. While it's not what you wanted, there is some potential to retool a little bit. Not rebuild, because you are not going to move the guys that you have multiple years of control of. You're not going to move any of the key position players. But if you can get some good pitching prospects back that are in AA, AAA, make some of the moves like you made a few seasons ago where you bring in Cade Povich and Chase McDermott, and somebody like Kyle Bradish was a trade not too long ago. If you can bring in some AA, AAA arms that could potentially be big league contributors pretty soon or down the stretch, maybe you move for arms that are already in the big leagues, and they are just controllable arms, like the Orioles made the move last year for Trevor Rogers. I know it didn't work out at the end of last year, but the thinking with Rogers was, man, we have this guy in the building for 2.5 years, so let's see what we can do with him, yes, at the end of this year, but also moving forward. Maybe you can move for guys like that, right? There are ways that you can retool and rework this team a little bit to where the farm system gets stocked up a little bit more. Maybe you have some more controllable contracts in the big leagues. It's not going to be a rebuild. You don't need to completely tear it down and build this thing from the ground up, because you have a lot of good young pieces here right now, but you can get more of them. And while that's not what you wanted, it could still be a plus at the deadline.
Yeah, and it's definitely going to be a tough pill to swallow when you kind of look at the guys who are there that have expiring contracts.
Yeah, and it's not a guarantee, right? Yeah. We could get to the trade deadline and the Orioles could be closer to 500, and now all of a sudden we're talking about whether or not they should be buyers or sellers. I think the point here is just that whichever way it goes, you can still find some positives in it.
Right, and I also kind of want to look into that Trevor Rogers trade as well from last year, where, yes, it seemed a lot harder to accept that trade going into this season when you know that Trevor Rogers didn't perform last year. But then after this last start of his that was phenomenal, you obviously hope you can get more out of that this year. But I also want to look at it in a different perspective, where the Marlins were sellers last year and they gave up Trevor Rogers for Kyle Stowers and Connor Norby.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's them giving up someone that was a valuable piece that still had some control left. In Trevor Rogers, they're getting Connor Norby, Kyle Stowers. Kyle Stowers is having a phenomenal season right now. And if you look at it that way, where, yes, if the Orioles do have become sellers, or maybe they do a little bit of both of buying and selling, then they can have that kind of scenario. Probably won't be a position player because everyone knows that they're going to need some pitching prospects or pitching arms already in the big leagues. But there is room for that kind of scenario where you get someone that is an immediate impact like Kyle Stowers was for them. Trevor Rogers, it took a while for him to be an impact for the Orioles, and he's still getting there to prove himself. But that can be a situation where, look, okay, you're giving away some valuable pieces, and maybe that's what they go for, but you're also going to get some value in some pieces as well.
Yeah, and I think the takeaway there in general, I think, that's kind of an interesting way of looking at it from the opposite perspective, where if the Orioles are in that opposite seat and they are selling some of the guys that are on expiring contracts, can they get some players that will make an immediate impact? Kyle Stowers, like, we have loved him here in Baltimore. Happy for him that he is having a lot of success in Miami. That's great. Maybe the Orioles can do a similar thing with, letting somebody go at the deadline that you love and wish were still here. And in an ideal world, they are still here contributing to winning baseball in Baltimore. But it's something that you can look at and go, man, the record's not where we want it to be. But that's maybe a helpful team for this ball club, given where we are, right? Because you have to zoom in a little bit in a scenario like this where, yeah, if you're going back to what your perspective was on this team in the offseason, the Orioles are below expectations. The front office has been the first one to tell you that. Mike Elias has talked about it. Everybody is disappointed with where this team is at this point, but you can still make lemonade out of this thing at this point. And I think a final scenario, going past the deadline and looking towards the end of the season, we touched on it a little bit, but it's just getting healthy and seeing what you have. If you get Kyle Bradish and Grayson Rodriguez back at the end of the year and they give you some nice starts, okay, cool. You feel like you've got two good starting pitchers at the top of your rotation for next year. Yes, with some injury concerns, so you're going to supplement those guys, but you feel good about that. We've already talked about kind of getting the young position player core back to playing the kind of baseball that they are capable of. But if the win-loss record isn't where you want it to be about halfway through the season, probably, Kobe Mayo and Samuel Basayo very well could be getting close to everyday at-bats for this team down the stretch, because there's no reason that they wouldn't be.
Right.
We have talked about it a lot over the past few seasons, where this is a very different environment for prospects to be playing in than it was a couple of seasons ago when Adley Rutschman and Gunnar Henderson were making their debuts, where those two guys could come up. Yes, they were the number one overall prospect in baseball, so they were going to get time either way. But you said, okay, we're not really competing at this point. We're starting to win some games. We're starting to turn things around. But Adley Rutschman, Gunnar Henderson, go figure it out. Kobe Mayo has never been afforded that opportunity.
Yeah.
Jackson Holliday has figured it out more this year, but he was never really afforded that opportunity either. Because when they came up last year, this was a team that was making a playoff push. They were trying to win as many baseball games as possible, and if Kobe Mayo wasn't that guy right away, then he wasn't going to get starts. It makes sense that Kobe Mayo wasn't that guy right away because he's jumping from AAA to the big leagues, but Gunnar Henderson and Adley Rutschman got to figure it out. They got everyday at-bats, and it was, hey, man, we believe in you. You're going to be a good big leaguer. Go through the growing pains. Kobe Mayo has not had the opportunity to do that. And so, again, there is a silver lining here where maybe in the second half of the year, if things are not looking good in the win-loss column, again, this could all be a moot point if the Orioles turn things around and they start playing great baseball. We talked about off the top some reasons for optimism. But you could still look back at this season and see a silver lining. If you get to the final 2 or 3 months, the win-loss record isn't where you want it to be. But man, Kobe Mayo just got everyday at-bats at third base, at first base, at DH, wherever you want him to be. And he figured it out at the dish. And now all of a sudden going into 2026, Kobe Mayo is a fixture somewhere. Whether it's at third or at first, wherever he is, he's got to be in the lineup because he just showed us that the bat is really, really good. Heston Kjerstad maybe can do the same thing towards the end of the year. I know he's been struggling as of late, but if he can figure it out, He could be a fixture going into next year. Samuel Basayo can do the same thing. Allow them the opportunity to go through the growing pains and to figure it out, come through on the other side, and now all of a sudden you've got a couple of more core pieces going into next year. Okay, I know you maybe lost some ball games, but you feel pretty good about having Kobe Mayo and Samuel Basayo get everyday at-bats and all of a sudden be ready to contribute in 2026 in a way that maybe they weren't going to be able to if they never got the opportunity to fail at the big league level.
Right. And like I said earlier in the podcast, where a lot of these routes and ways to look at a successful season when all is said and done at the end of the year and the World Series has already passed, is they go hand in hand. And I think that this one does go hand in hand with maybe being sellers and trading away some valuable veterans and players that have expiring contracts, because players like Kobe Mayo, Samuel Basayo haven't really gotten the opportunity to carve an exact path for themselves, just given the talent that's already at the big league level. And you could also make the same argument with Enrique Bradfield Jr. I know he's a lot further along because he's still in Double-A, but there is going to be room for him if there should be a case where some veteran players get moved along. And he also needs to be able to go through the same growing pains that you're talking about.
Yeah, Dylan Beavers, Judd Fabian, you can put in that conversation too. Do you finally get a chance to see what you have in those guys? Right.
And we also know that former top prospects in this organization have not had the easiest time in their first stint in the big leagues. That's a no-brainer. We saw it with Holiday. We saw it with Gunnar. We saw it with Adley. The list goes on. You also saw the year 1 to year 2 jump with Jackson Holiday when he had the opportunity to go through the struggles, maybe figure out, okay, I need to switch to a toe tap in the offseason and actually find a way to succeed. Kobe Mayo has not had that opportunity yet. He has been back up to the big leagues this season, but it was in another scenario where he's coming up, filling a hole for the time being during some injuries. He still needs that opportunity. And if you look at the end of the season and all that they've done is, okay, maybe they've had some progress in the young stars in when they were underperforming in the beginning of the season, and then they found it out in the later parts of the season. But you could also look at some key points of success in the season of 2025 is that you had some reps for Kobe Mayo, Samuel Basayo, Fabian, Beavers, you name it.
Yeah, and I think if we are looking back at this season, given where the Orioles are right now, for me, I'll pose the same question to you, but I think what is a successful year for me, I think it's a combination of a lot of these things. As I mentioned, I think the biggest key, bullet point, number one, whatever you want to call it, you need to make sure that this young core of position players gets back to playing the kind of baseball that they are capable of playing. Because if Gunnar Henderson and Adley Rutschman aren't back to their forms from previous seasons, you have bigger problems than 2025, right? But I believe in those guys. The Orioles believe in those guys. There's a reason they have built the franchise around them. And you can get those guys back to playing really good baseball. But if you see that at the end of the year, if you see Kobe Mayo kind of work things out towards the end of the season, Samuel Basayo gets some opportunities. Maybe you see what you have in Beavers or Fabian, and at the deadline you retool a little bit, maybe bring in some good pitching prospects or some controllable arms. The win and loss record might be what it might be, right? There is still absolutely a world where the Orioles can turn things around. They can play good baseball. They have the talent to do it. And I don't think it would be utterly shocking, because this scenario is utterly shocking, where we are even talking about them being potential sellers at the deadline. So it would not be a massive, massive shock to see this team turn things around, to make a run. The purpose of this podcast is not to close that window and say they are not going to make a run, because they absolutely could. And if that's how you define success the rest of the way, as a playoff appearance and being in the fight down the stretch, sure, absolutely. I just think for me, it's, can you get the core back to where they need to be?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously you want to be able to say that the main way to salvage the 2025 season is make it to the playoffs. Everyone will tell you that, that is the way to salvage a season. Sports are a weird thing. Baseball is a weird thing. Weirder things have happened than to start a season 19-35 and also end up making the playoffs.
Yeah.
That is still a possibility because there's a reason why we're here discussing all these alternate routes and ways to measure success because we don't know. Things could happen, like you just mentioned. I think that is obviously still a stretch, and you want to hold on to that hope, and I'm still holding on to that hope because I think that this team is capable of doing that. I will agree with you that I think making sure that guys like Adley and Gunnar and Holiday and Kauser and Westberg and Mountcastle for that matter too, figure things out. I would also like to throw in Cade Povich into that scenario.
Sure.
Opposite sides of the ball, but he still has potential to become a breakout star in this season and have a really, really strong season and kind of shift the narrative of a little bit of a roller coaster of an early part of 2025.
Absolutely.
The young core needs to hold on to the identity that they are the identity of this team and uphold the standards. Follow Ryan O'Hearn as an example. This guy, obviously, his numbers are hard to reach right now because what he's doing is incredible, but I think that they all have the potential to be able to do it, and that should be the main goal of the season, is figuring out everything that is wrong with these guys before, not wrong, that sounds very intense, but everything that is not working out with each individual to be able to figure it out before the end of 2025 season so that it's not the same issue in 2026.
Yeah, and if that happens, the wins are going to come. And they might be in the fight down the stretch, right? But I think we are probably in agreement there that if those guys put up some good numbers towards the end of the season, if you get an extended look at your top prospects, if you are able to retool a little bit, bring in some good young pitchers, then you could look at the rest of the season from here on out and say, okay, they did some good things. The Orioles are where they are. The standings are what they are. But if you can do some of that stuff towards the end of the year, you can still feel okay at the end of this season.
Right, and July 31st, the trade deadline is still a long ways away.
Long way away.
So,
we'd be having a very different conversation in a few weeks if the Orioles rattle off a couple of more good stretches like they just did this past weekend in Boston and in their first game of the series against St. Louis. They still have a chance to win the series against the Cardinals, against a red-hot Cardinals team.
Yeah.
As we mentioned, might not be today because it's raining a lot. Might be tomorrow, but there's still an opportunity there. But I think that'll just about do it for this week's edition of The Bird's Nest. Thank you for following along with us live on our YouTube channel. If you didn't catch us live, you can catch us after the fact on Spotify, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts or your digital shows. You can find us here on The Bird's Nest. We were live at 11 a.m. on a Wednesday again this week.
Woohoo!
We did it. We weren't live on Facebook because we are having technical difficulties because what else is new? But you know what? We tried our hardest. But we'll see how this homestand goes for the Orioles and hopefully some more good vibes next week on the podcast as well. Big shout out to Amy Jennings behind the scenes for producing this one. For Annie Klaff, I am Brendan Mortensen, and we'll catch you next time.